A very good morning and a warm welcome to one and all present over here. Myself Anuj Rabade, and today we all have gathered here once again for the 10th session of Manthan, the discussion forum started by Pravara Rural College of Architecture, Loni, under the guidance of our principal ma'am, architect Rajeshwari Jagtap ma'am. Also, as usual, I would like to mention that Manthan, the discussion forum, it is open for all. Let it be students, let it be academicians, or let it be even professionals. This forum will discuss topics related to architecture, history, art, culture, heritage, sustainability, management, and many more. So I request everyone to please take a note of this that Manthan will be organized on first and third Wednesday of every month between 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. on our official YouTube channel named Pravara Rural College of Architecture, Loni. So, if you guys are interested in presenting your research, your case study, site visit, or any of the other activity which you have done in your academic career, you can mail on the mail ID which has been running on the screen right now. So, friends, for today's Manthan session, we have two fellow speakers with us, Mr. Noel Prabhakar and Mr. Rohit Kataria, and both of them are from Allana College of Architecture, Pune. So, firstly, I would like to introduce Mr. Rohit Kataria, who is an architect in the Integrate Architects Pune and is also a design head in Studio Transcend Pune. He is also a head manager at the Alvin Services Pune Fabrication Contractor. He has completed his B.Arch course from Allana College of Architecture Pune in the year 2020. He well utilized the pandemic period by doing virtual courses like Rethink the City to delve and leveraging urban mobility disruptions to create better cities, MIT. He worked as an architectural intern at 100 Hands Design, Bangalore, and Navinya Designers, Pune. Recently, he even participated in Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism 2021, and his entry was internationally shortlisted. He also got selected at the national level in the Lixil Mentorship Program. He secured first position in the PCERF 2019 state level urban design competition. Not only this, his research paper on multi-layered urbanism was also published in the National Conference of Empirical Theories 2020 journal. While he was scaling great heights by achieving various other achievements, he didn't underestimate his academic performance and thus secured first position in fourth and final year B.Arch at the Allana College of Architecture, Pune. He also actively participated in the Sky High Skyscraper Challenge competition. Apart from competitions, Rohit has also participated in various workshops like the Laurie Baker Design Workshop of NASA, Frame Conclave Workshop by Matter Studio, L Studio Workshop by Matthew and Ghosh Architects, In Search of Coherence Workshop by Studio M Mad E, and the Tracing Narratives by the Pune chapter. Being so much multi-responsible, multi-talented, and multitasking, I hereby request Mr. Rohit Kataria to go on with his presentation.
Thanks for the introduction, Anuj. I think it's quite overwhelming. I think I'll just start with the presentation. Can you all see it? Hello?
Yeah, it's visible. You can go on.
Yeah, okay, then I'll just begin. Yeah. So project that I'll be putting forward today is not an architectural project per se. It's an ideology that I've been working for a while now. It's a theory that I've studied through different researches that I've carried out and through a lot of readings that I've done on my time. And it later on culminated into an architectural project, which became my thesis project. And this is how it went. So, like I said, it's a culmination of a lot of ideas, and it started with the basic understanding of what our cities have become. Like the cities are the pinnacle of human evolution. It is the best project that we have ever done, and this is what it looks like. Is this how it should be? I mean, what's really happened to our cities? This concrete monoblock form of architecture that has taken over the urban fabric, and when you look at this picture, you can't even define it if it's Mumbai or Pune or Delhi. So what's really happened to architecture? You can most probably recognize the central picture, and that's because of the heritage that's there, and not the recent development that we have done so far. So what really happened to our cities? And the answer is the urban sprawl. This slide shows what Mumbai went through in the course of 200 years. The scary part is that in this slide you can see the similar things happening to the city of Pune, but in the span of 25 years. So it's evidently clear that the newly developing cities are experiencing urban sprawl at a much rapid rate than the earlier cities. And this phenomenon of urban sprawl is developing in the global south, in Mexico, in Asia, and in Africa, in the developing cities now. So, and what this has led to is dilution of the core identity of our cities, where we can't even define what cities are anymore. We can't define what the core of the city is and what the outskirts are. There's no language that this sort of development is following. What I'm trying to say is that the most of the urban planning that exists today is an aftermath to whatever problems have arose because of city development. And the current policy suggests that anybody suggests individual freedom where anybody could buy a land anywhere and build a structure anywhere. But that isn't working out. That isn't really working out for us. The heritage cores that need to be preserved are going under modernization rather than conservation. In the last slide, we saw how the city has grown sevenfolds in the span of merely 25 years. But when we look at the city cores, they still speak this language. So what's the irony of the situation is that we are spreading everywhere, but we still don't have spaces, livable spaces for our cities anymore. So where did we go wrong? What's really happening? And what's the cost of this unplanned development across the globe? It's not, when we look at the cost of things, it's not about the monetary cost that I'm focusing on, but it's the cost. Every hour that we spend in commuting throughout our cities is the cost that we're paying. The loss of species, the loss of animal and the forest land that is going because of the constant galloping that our city is doing, is the cause that I'm talking about. So how do we create a city that is compact enough yet spacious enough for people to stay in it? A city that doesn't spread out like an oil stain, rather it's deep rooted in its core. A city which is not just spreading omnidirectionally, but it's rooted in its heritage, in its cultural values. How do we do that? So let's look at theory, what theory suggests. Vitruvius, in his first book of architecture, mentions the importance of cities. He quotes that when you're designing a city, the most important thing that you should be doing is defining the city boundaries and the public buildings. Our cities not only prioritize private development over public buildings, but our boundaries are changing every Monday morning. So what do we do about this? Corbusier tried to address a similar question when he proposed the radiant city for Paris, where instead of spreading laterally, we take the vertical dimension and we spread the city vertically and keep the ground layer empty so that the people of the city can use up that space, and the city remains intact in its core without spreading outside. And this is what the proposal looked like. The proposal it was a visionary proposal because it's still contextual today. It wasn't applied back then, but if it was, it would be still applicable now. It's still applicable now, and it's still contextual now. There was another famous architect called Patrick Gatiss who studied Indian cities in detail, and you can see in the bottom left plans the extreme left plan is the existing condition of that part of the city, and the right plan is what he proposed. He calls this the conservative surgery, wherein he's removing a certain bits and pieces of the buildings in the area. He's attaching it on the upper layer and creating open spaces and public squares in the same region. So he's creating spaces in the city without overwhelming it. Totally opposite to what we are doing right now with our cities. Whether it be the Garden City proposal, the Radiant City proposal, or the KM3 proposal by MVRDV, all of them focused on one single principle of creating public spaces along with maintaining the city boundaries. So how do we achieve that with such readings? What do we do with the existing sort of development? Do we just take off the buildings and create open spaces? How do we make these things happen? So this was the region when I was trying to explore what my intervention could be like, what sort of intervention could bring in more space into the city and create that sort of a livable aspect that we have lost over our way of development throughout these years. So that's when I created these artworks wherein you can see a form slithering across a city that's trying to create more space in the city and yet trying to decongest it. So I don't know how that's going to happen, but this is how I envisioned it to be. So when we look at the ground layer of the city, let's imagine it to be a little porous rather than solid. So if you're looking at the city right now, if the above buildings are the urban fabric, what I'm proposing is this. So when you do this, when you attach an urban fabric below a city, the above fabric becomes empty. So automatically the spaces are being added and the city is getting decongested. So if you imagine a city like a building, what parasitic city does is that it is taking the services, the public spaces, the public infrastructure, transportation facilities, and communal spaces underground, because they don't need to be on ground. These we can't afford to have these spaces on ground level. What this tactic does is that it clears off the space on the ground to create public squares for us. It clears spaces for us to create residential development and office development and commercial development, which needs to be on the upper layer of the city. So we can use the same square kilometer of land for different purposes at different heights. When we look at fiction, no, not fiction, when you look at Vedas and Puranas, they have mentioned the prevalence of underground city a number of times. In fiction, Dan Brown mentions the underground way of living. But when I got deeper into the applicability of it in our modern day cities, I found out that there's a lot of research being done into the similar way that I've been exploring into. And as it turns out, it's the underground architecture won't just solve problems of our city needs, but it can also cater to cities' needs at times of plagues and viruses, because these underground fabric can potentially get converted into bunkers and spaces for people to secure themselves during extraordinary situations. So it's a multifunctional, it's a dynamic proposal that these spaces tend to offer. So while I was studying these projects, I realized that the principle that I was thinking on, they have already been executed in different parts of the world. The changes that our cities are going through right now, European and American nations have already gone through, and now they have already invented a solution for it, which is, for example, this is the underground pedway system of Chicago, wherein an underground fabric is developed below the city so that more spaces are generated in the city itself. People can travel through these spaces, avoiding the congestion in the center of the city. You don't have to move out to for in search of more spaces, because now the city has enough spaces for the new functions to be developed. There is no need for vehicular and pedestrian network to be on the same level. It can work either way, and that's what these guys proposed. And this is what it looks like. Now, the Chicago had a limitation of being sea locked, so it had nowhere to grow. In our situation, we have space to grow outside, but it doesn't mean that we have to grow. It's leading to unsustainable way of urban growth, and that's what we should focus on more. This is an example of Montreal City in Canada, where they have developed kilometers of area underground connected via a metro route in the center of the city. So they are avoiding development on the outskirts and they're developing the core of the city, so that the modern development is still happening without disturbing the heritage of the city in its core, and yet people don't have to move out. So this is a more sustainable way of development per se. And this is what the development looks like. It's trying to show that the city has a lot of spaces in the center, and we don't really have to depend on the outskirts for spatial needs of the city. This is the map of the Helsinki city, and the blue part in this region shows the underground fabric, which is latched onto the yellow part, which is the layer above the city. And these spaces are the spaces that the Finland could not afford to have it on the upper layer of the city, which are the public spaces. In Indian cities, we have so many things to celebrate. We have so many festivals, yet we don't have anywhere to go, and we end up having those celebrations on the streets itself, This idea proposes an ideology where we can have these spaces latched onto the city below, where you could have spaces for all kinds of function without creating a havoc above. So the city functions normally above, and the fabric added below assists it. That's the parasitic behavior that I'm trying to address with this project. And this is what the spaces looked like before. Who could imagine development of such a large scale under an existing city? Such sort of development have happened everywhere across the world for different purposes, like in Japan, in Beijing. This is the London Underground Network, where they have taken the entire transportation network below to create a more pedestrian friendly environment in the core of the city. So can we work on similar principles? Can we design things? Can we put it into Indian context? That's the real question. Whenever people think about such proposals coming into India, the main question that they have is it a foreign idea? How can you put it into a context which is so culturally rooted? But what I'm trying to put forth is that this idea will do more good to the project than it will harm the cultural significance of our spaces, because the current sort of development is not really addressing what we are doing right now. And it's not that India doesn't have a lot of potential to get carried on with such projects. In fact, when this is the underground development that's currently happening all across the country. What I'm proposing is we latch functions to these underground projects itself, and that's when we create more spaces in the city without really harming anything else. People could directly access this transportation network, the metro route, from anywhere across the city. They could come to the core of the city or wherever those spaces are. They could utilize these spaces and they could go back. The ideology suggests that for every building that you create in the core of the city, you avoid 10 such happening on the outskirts. Dominic Perrault is a pioneer in this ideology. He has dedicated his life to the concept of groundscapes, where he's trying to merge the boundaries between above ground and below ground. And this is what his proposals look like. This is what he suggested that the city cores in all across the world would look like how you could maintain the heritage of the space and still have the development without overwhelming it. That's the Chrysler building in NYC. These are the sort of development that he pictures to happen in Paris. No matter how much we try to avoid such sort of development, it is eventually going to happen. So what he's proposing is, why don't we integrate it in the current urban planning policies, so that at least it's a thought after development and not an afterthought. What we have been doing right now. These are his proposals in South Korea, and these are already under executions, which shows the relevance and the impact that these proposals can have on the urban scape, where the upper layer is a complete public space and the below layer is shelved for different functions. So the city functions normally, and the livable aspect grows 10 times, and that's what we are trying to achieve with such proposals. These are some of the case studies that try to show the relevance of such projects in our cities, and the need of such proposals because we need to cater to the existing demands of the city. We can't just ignore it. The cities are getting congested every minute as it passes, and if we don't take such radical measures, it will start imploding. Our cores are getting emptier. The cultural cores of the cities are filled during the daytimes, and during the night it turns into a donut shape, wherein the entire city moves towards the outskirts because it's a livable fabric, and the core remains empty, where the life once prevailed. So how do we deal with this thing? And I believe this can be one of those solutions to bring life back to the core of the city and avoid the unnecessary urban sprawl. This project is a beautiful example of how the heritage and modern development can merge with each other, wherein the modern development lies beneath it and the heritage is unharmed. These are some of the thesis projects across the world which are trying to show um, how impactful these projects are on a functional level, yet they appear as if nothing has happened underground, and it's the urban scape remains unbothered. One of the contextual case studies would be the Palika Bazaar in Delhi, where a similar proposal has been experimented with. As you can imagine, Delhi is jam packed with functions from all sides. So, what the architect here did was he took the parking spaces below ground to create this urban square in the center of the city, exactly what we are proposing. And this worked wonders over there. So, this proposal created a garden in the center of city. No one could ever imagine that. And this, if we implement such sort of a development in different parts of the cities, automatically we'll have more spaces for our cities. We'll automatically increase more leisure spaces in the cities. People will start coming back to the city cores, and that's what we are trying to promote with this project. So when we look forward to such development, it has to be integrated in such a way that we need to define what goes below ground and what goes above ground. So it's fairly practical that the spaces that we spend time in just to utilize those spaces and not merge with the surroundings can be taken below. The leisure spaces, public transportation networks, parking facilities can need not be on the upper layer of the cities. It's a very thought-provoking decision of taking these functions underground, because it's clearly not applied to have these spaces on ground in the city course next to the heritage buildings, like how it's happening right now. This table shows how we could divide the functions on different layers of the cities. We could use the same square kilometer of the space for different functions at different levels, and how we could create a sustainable sort of development in this factor. And what the repercussions could be: a clear space on the upper ground. We could literally go back to how the city was 50 years ago, how spacious it was, how decongested it was by doing such a move. So both the factors of above ground development and underground development it's a cohesive form of development. It's an interdependent behavior that I'm trying to propose, wherein the fabric latches below it. It takes the functions off ground, and the functions are stored below to create an open space above. Well, such sort of development would require a cohesive effort from a lot of institutional bodies. Not only architects and planners, but also government bodies need to be equally um, involved with these issues. Institutions, NGOs, public bodies, they all need to work in synergy to have projects of such massive scale being carried out in our urban fabric. It's not really easy to carry out such projects, but I believe with active public participation and with government bodies clearly working with each other, we can carry out such projects. Some of the operational steps to get forward with these projects would be to define the boundary of the city first, that we won't pass this threshold, and we'll work in the city limits. We'll try to make it happen in the city limits, so that that ideology of buying a land anywhere across the city and growing the city anywhere is dropped down, and we look at our development as a race and not as an individual. Interventions needs to be carried out at urban centers. Policies have to be made to integrate subterranean architecture into newly developed buildings, so that it's connected via the existing infrastructure that is being planned. And synergic implementation from all bodies is an absolute must. What this would create, uh, as you can probably imagine it, what we are experiencing right now is the worst form of urban development that can happen. And there is no language that our cities possess. What this would do is bring forward the identity that has lost over time. It would decongest the existing haphazard development that has happened in the city, and it would bring back the core values that the city had. You could really identify what Pune is and Mumbai is, because that part would outshine, and that's how cities would look like in the future. There are a lot of benefits to subterranean architecture, but there are a lot of limitations too, and we can't ignore that. For instance, lack of technology in construction techniques, the initial monetary investment that it has, the perception that people have about underground spaces, but and also the safety concerns. But when you compare the both in the longer run, the benefits of this sort of architecture far outweigh the limitations of it, and the limitations can be easily overcome by designers and operators. So I believe this is a very promising field of exploration, and it needs to be looked out in detail. Another sort of question is that when this sort of development is eventually going to happen, you believe it or not, our cities are moving towards it. So why not integrate it in the current sort of development, so that it's at least planned? So if you look at the city right now, if this is how you represent the city pictorially, this is what we are trying to define: a city boundary. This is where the interventions are going to be. As the years pass by, these subterranean interventions, they grow in number, and as they grow in numbers, the city is still same in size, but it's growing like a deep rooted tree, unlike an oil stain spreading everywhere. and eventually you get a separate urban fabric that lives off the above urban fabric and lives cohesively with it without having to depend on anything else. So this ideology further developed into my architectural thesis. I wouldn't get into much detail of it, but I would just run through the slides to give you an understanding of how the project looked like. So this project was also a prototype that happened into the center of Pune city, and this is what the subterranean layers looked like. It created an urban square on the upper layer, and it decongested the entire region. So it's not just a fictional theory. You can see that I myself have applied it in one of the places that I know. So this theory is very practical and is creating a lot of space for us in the longer run. The entry was also put forward as one of the entries for the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism, and it was shortlisted to be a part of that presentation. And this is what it looked like. So the proposal imagines the city in layers. The ground, as you can see, is a meshwork. It's porous. It's liberating you from the thought of primitive ways of city design, which is the lateral development. It's about the vertical growth now. It's about integrated growth now. It's not just haphazard construction everywhere. The research paper on this project, on this ideology, also got published in the National Conference of Empirical Theories, and it suggested similar principles of what India could look like in the coming years, of what subterranean development could look like in our context. There are a lot of people who are responsible for these ideologies. This sort of development, the project has developed because of a lot of people, specifically Sandeep Pete sir, Vinesh Desai sir, Masrad, Shreyans. These people were an integral part of this project. And most importantly, my professor, Dhwani Iyer, she has been throughout this project and she's responsible for most of what this project has become. And that's the parasitic city. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Rohit, that was a really very interesting topic of your research. And here are some questions related to your presentation, related to your research topic. My first question to you is what would be the longevity of such proposals, and how do you see them adapting to the future needs?
There's a beautiful quote that I came across when I was doing my research, that we, the architects, the city planners, we are not really the fathers of our cities. We are in fact the midwives. Every now and then the city dies out and we have to give birth to it again. So the urban interventions that have been there so far have failed, and they're supposed to fail because the cities are evolving. And this proposal that I'm putting forward is contextual now. It's going to be contextual for the next 50, 100 years, but after it, it's going to die out again. So it's a prevention that I'm proposing rather than a cure. This is eventually going to happen, but if we implement it right now, it's in a better good for the people.
Exactly, exactly. My next question to you is how do we define that what functions are to be designed above the ground, and what functions are to be designed above the sorry, below the ground?
Like I mentioned in my presentation, it's quite clear that the spaces that we spend a lot of time in, the residential spaces, can't be taken underground. We are not designed to live underground. We need to be connected with the outer surroundings. But just like I said, if you imagine a city like a building, we are taking the services underground. These spaces need not be on the upper layer of the city. The parking spaces don't deserve to be on the upper layer of the city. They're creating more spaces for other functions above it. So yeah, that's how we analyze functions very critically, and that's how we take it below.
Okay. My last question to you is why do you think this sort of development hasn't happened in India yet?
So when I was doing this course with MIT, it was a virtual course, and there were students from all across the globe, and we came up with the bottom line answer for this as public awareness. People are really not aware of such projects or such the magnitude and impact of such projects. If we if we take an example of Kumbh Mela, it's a mind-boggling task. They're bringing a city to a space for a few days and they're taking it back, but they're doing it because they're aware of it. They're aware of the culture. It's deep rooted in their brains, and that's why they can carry out such functions. So if people are aware, if the NGOs, the government bodies are aware of it, we can carry out tasks of such magnitudes, and it's not a big thing for us as compared to Kumbh Mela.
Well, thank you so
Yes.
much, Rohit. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. It's a wonderful presentation and a wonderful research that you have done on underground structures as well as underground cities, and beautiful thesis presentation as well, coming up with the solution and its application in our very own Pune. So that is a fantastic thing that I really appreciate and a lot of hard work. So, as a professor, also as a practicing architect, I really wonder, like this kind of proposal which we are talking is very futuristic in nature. Means like it is not something which we are talking in 1 year duration or maybe even
Definitely.
5 year duration. We are talking about 50 years, 100 years,
50 years, 100
when
years, yeah.
this kind of concept will be adapted by the people or by the government. So one question comes to my mind that our Earth, Mother Earth, is so much vulnerable to the development, and as architects or urban designers, we should say that we are the most responsible industry in polluting or in damaging the environment at a large scale. So, how do you think is this sustainability parameter in the underground cities going to work?
What I would like to say is that we need to redefine the concepts of sustainability. It's a very vague term. When we think about sustainability, all we can think about is what's happening right now, but we haven't even considered the time factor in it. The thing that's just unsustainable right now. Let me put it clearly that underground development is the most unsustainable thing that you can do right now. But in the longer run, when you look back, when you 100 years down the line, when you look back, this would be the most sustainable move because the city is not spreading anymore. It is right there. So we are burning a little part of the city to save the city. That's what I would say.
Okay, so we can save the forest. Main thing is, I think we can save the forest. That is the
Yeah. The burning of more
achievement.
trees to save the
Yes,
forest. Yeah.
instead of going on a surface and linear or radial development, this is a very innovative kind of thing. What are the current limitations in this sort of development? Means like what do you think? Means apart from the government or this, if government thinks of taking it up also, and what methods or do you think would help in advancement of such cities across the country? Like if tomorrow Pune thinks that we should go for an underground structures, even underground metro is people are fearing कि मेरा building गिर जाएगा क्या, that kind of scenario that people are facing. So how do you think is applicable? You feel which cities you can you identify few cities where this can be applicable or can be proposed per se?
Um, it's a two-part question. I believe it's a very long question to answer. The first part of it would be how, what methods we could do to have this sort of construction in like our country. The thing is that we as architects are not really voicing ourselves. We need to be on the upper ladder to really voice such opinions and put forth such ideas. We are not the driving factor. We need to be the driving factor. We once were in the Roman period. The cities were run by architects and planners. We have lost that reach over people now, and we need to get it back to get such sort of development and change ideologies because we have been trained to look at urban scapes and cities in a cohesive manner. We understand that we need to burn some things to save a larger thing, larger situations, and we need to put that forward. What was the second question, ma'am?
Like, which cities can you
Right,
identify,
right, right,
like, are
right,
the
right.
right?
So initially, the idea, my thesis, I was planning to propose it in Mumbai, but later on, I realized that if I'm proposing something if I'm proposing something so invasive, it better be in a city where that I know the most about. So this proposal is a prototype. It can be applicable anywhere. It's a prototype ideology. It's not a form that can be placed anywhere, but the ideology can be in any city because we need to save all the cities. The plague of urban sprawl is affecting each and every city across the planet, especially in the developing cities. So this sort of ideology is prototype for all those cities. It's not specific to any city, but majorly Pune needs to consider this because Pune has been growing at such a larger pace that Pune and Mumbai have come so close that they're becoming one city. And we can't really let that happen because then the entire nation could become one city and there won't be any variation. And that's the sort of sustainability that we should look into.
Yes, I think it's a good proposition that each city should think of it, because yes, you rightly said that otherwise entire nation can become a city, and we are a very large surface area on this planet Earth. India has along with us. So thank you, Rohit, for your very wonderful insights and thinking of sustainability and the cities per se as urban planners. And we really thank you
Thank
for
you.
being the part of Manthan Discussion Forum for Pravara Rural College of Architecture, Loni. And we hope to see you soon again with such
Definitely, ma'am.
beautiful ideas.
Definitely.
So thank you very much.
Yes,
Over
ma'am.
to you,
Yes, ma'am.
Anuj.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rohit, for such a lovely and wonderful presentation. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Noel Prabhakar. He is a third year BArch student from Allana College of Architecture, Pune, as I said. He has done his SSC from Sacred Heart Convent High School, Pune, and HSC from Ahmednagar College, Pune. He has a special interest in drawing and trying new art styles, thus believing in versatility. He also loves to analyze certain things, whether it be cinematic movies or even games. He's a great fond of playing simulation games with respect to architectural design. Apart from this, he loves listening music of all genre and often plays with those melodious strings of guitar. He also loves playing football and collecting different team kits. Noel has planted a tree of skills amongst himself, wherein the branches of that tree includes live painting, cartoons, street paintings, photorealistic sketches, caricatures, comic arts, wall paintings, sculpting, making animation videos, digital artwork, gaming, and some architectural softwares like AutoCAD, SketchUp, etc. So, without any further ado, I now request Mr. Noel Prabhakar to go on with his presentation.
Thank you, Anuj. I mean, that was really very overwhelming. So let's just jump into it. So this is my Design Phi subject, Students Music Welfare Center. Uh, it was given to given to us by our teachers, and we were introduced to it as Pune's culture. It's Marathi, and there is a lot of importance to arts and crafts and education and theater. And with that aspect, we had to design a students music welfare center because our site is the site was really huge, and when we were deciding like what exactly should we make, and so we all decided that a music center sounds great. Not just a music center per se, but actually a art center. So basically there's also exhibition, and if celebrity guests come, so there's also amphitheater, open air amphitheater. So let's just go into it. uh, yeah, so whenever we get a design, I kind of try to find a game related with that design so I can get somewhat a simulation with how my design should be and what the user actually wants. And whenever we get a design from our teachers, I I directly start thinking about the form or the the shape that I'm going to use in this design. So what I was very inspired by just now is a concept of common tailor bird nest. And so when I saw this nest, I was very inspired because the way there is also a facade to that nest, and there's also a structural part in it. So like the nest is the structural part, and there's this leaf that's kind of a cladding or a facade of that thing. And in so we had to design this the with the context of having a artistic or musical thing. So what I went into very basic of music, like there are frequency and wavelengths in music, and this concept of nest and this concept of going into basics of music like frequency and wavelength. I kind of tried to fuse them both together, and then I got this very organic roof profile that I developed. And then I started developing more in terms of material because it was very organic and this was very new to me. I mean, I was experiencing it something new. And then what I had to do is find out the material that I'm going to use for this roof profile. So what I thought is better to do a case study. So of course I chose a structure by Zaha Hadid, the Haida Ali Center, and I tried to find out what material did was used there. So and why was that material used there? So like it's a prefabricated Jassy panel, as you can see here in the sketch. It's kind of in stepwise, so you get an idea of what is the topmost layer and what's the bottommost layer. And that's how I found out the material. Our site was located in Dhattawadi in Pune, across a river called as Panma River. So the site was so beautiful. I mean, there's also a bridge going across the site, like not from the site, but from the side of the site. And it was so beautiful that I had to kind of think about the orientation of my structure with respect to that river. Because as you can see, the north is here, right? So what I try to do is I want to orient this structure which can gain more good views for the structure for the user. I mean, if the user enjoys the structure, I mean, there's always going to be people if they enjoy the structure. And what I thought about the orientation of the structure, like where should I place the openings more? So what I thought that more openings from the south side. So like placing the structure from the south side. So it's like gaining more sunlight, and there's even evaporative cooling because of river there. And also it kind of will give the user a great feel of whole structure with respect to the river. And there's also a 20-meter promenade over there, and very fluidity kind of becomes something new to a person to look at. So like they see something not something so unusual that they point it out, like look what's over there, should we go there? Because the site is a lot away from the city, and I wanted to design something that people will come here. It's not going to be a standard place. So something that people will visit, something unusual, something new that people want to experience in that area. So that's how I came up with it. And this is the planning of the whole structure. So you kind of enter from the northeast side here. So like there's the zoning is very simple. So it was actually an art center, so we had to make all almost all kind of art. So like we have to cover exhibition spaces, open galleries, amphitheaters, closed and open amphitheaters. So as you can see, this big amphitheater, it's an open air amphitheater, and over like in the extreme left, there's a performance hall, which is a closed kind of a closed performance hall. So by any chance, if there's a say event or something in both the places, so like this crowd noise doesn't disturb this crowd, because the performance hall performances are usually quiet, like pianos and all the musicians, orchestra, so like that. And you enter the space from this side. Here's the parking area. So you enter the structure from this side, and there's the exhibition area. So reason for placing exhibition area right in front of the entrance is because something to catch your eye immediately. I know the structure catches your eye, but even if you come inside, something to catch your eye, some art to look at. So there's this exhibition area that opens to an open gallery, which is covered with glass. So it's like open and it's only covered with glass, and you will feel very it's a closed space, but you still feel open. You still feel connection with the outside, and while you're looking at art. So there's that, and there's some contour playing with contours here, so kind of creates a seating place for the people here. And let's move on. So this is kind of the elevation of the structure. You will get a better idea of a open gallery from this picture. So like people can sit here outside or they can just watch the art. It's easy to place art outside here. So even if there's by any chance there's rain, there won't be a lot of water coming inside. And this is the elevation, so more kind of a fluidity, more rhythm to the structure, and going with somewhat asymmetrical thing. So this is the open air amphitheater. What I was most inspired by was the Red Rock Amphitheater. It also has the same kind of design. So like as you can see here, there's this material that I have used, the panels, and it goes along the seating. So this is the seating, right? And you sit here, and this goes along. So what does this seating, this thing that it's going down? It kind of creates a focal point to the stage, and it kind of attracts your attention to the stage, and it's like wow. I mean, there's this fluidity, and you're also sitting to this open sky and listening to this music. Uh, honestly, I would just love to live in my design for once, but I think I already did that. So yeah, this is another time problem that was given by teachers. That was very interesting. That the site was same. So the river of the site, we have to make a floating stage there. So how do I do that? So I don't know, but I started thinking of things that float on water, like lotus, not exactly floats, but and it inspired me because it's also a national flower of India, and I really was thinking maybe my structures can have that lotus type shape or something like that. So that's how I came up with the idea of kind of placing a lotus between the rivers. So like even when the people are going from the beach or people are going from the roads, they kind of see a big lotus uh, in on the river, and it kind of feel very fictional that you see such a big lotus on the river. And yeah, when people are actually playing music on that stage, so it will create a more good ambience for the people there and people on the site. So that's how I came up with the floating stage, the floating lotus, I named it. And this is the walkway you can see. That idea came from the lily pads, or the pads that lotus have around them. So kind of just stacking up the pads and just creating a walkway like that. So it still somewhat feels natural and still looks really neat. And that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Noel. That was a really very interesting presentation, and the design concept which you used, that was really very much unique, we could say.
Thank you.
So I have some questions for you. My first question is,
Yeah.
it is very general. How did you come up with that concept, and what inspired you for taking that concept?
So I have a lot of plantation in my house. Like my mom and we do somewhat of a landscaping, like placing small pots and this and that. And what happened is this a small bird came and she started making a nest, and not like I was seeing it live, but she sewed the whole nest. So that kind of just inspired me, like how she's also made it structurally stable and also given it a kind of a facade that leaves at the facade. That inspired me very much, and I started doing this basic sketches of what I can do to put this in my design. So it's just like that.
Sounds great. My next question to you is any reason for having a fluid form or plan?
Uh, I think it was just because it kind of create this thing in you that you want to look at that structure. I mean, let me be clear. You always see this box type structures. So that's why I wanted to create something new because this site is a lot far away from the city area. So maybe creating something so new that people will often come and visit. People going from here and there might just say, "Okay, let's go to that place because it seems so new. It's fluid and this fluid thing is new." And honestly, I haven't seen a lot of fluid things in Pune, so I thought might as well design one. So
Great,
yes,
Noel.
ma'am.
Okay,
So
over to
Yes,
the
you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
thought process, yes, the thought process itself is very fluid, and that shows your dynamism in design. That you really
Yeah,
observe
yes,
things
ma'am.
from the nature and take it to the architecture, and then create such kind of structures.
Yes, ma'am.
But can you just elaborate on something that the material that you are using for this particular forms, or
Uh,
it's
yes,
like
ma'am.
any
So I'm
technology that you
actually
suggest for this?
so, ma'am. There's usually a structural engineer who does this. So, like, I took Zaha Hadid's Hyder Ali Center, for example, and I kind of searched ki what material she used because my even my form is looking somewhat similar to her form. So what I thought ki I should look it up what material she's using, how is that material created, why is that material good. So there's this GRC panels. They are also called as glass reinforced concrete. So basically, the reason for choosing them is because they are cheap and they're lightweight. So my structure has a lot of horizontal thing going on. So lightweight was a must for me, and also flexibility. So GRC panels they have a lot of tensile strength. So that's my reason for using the GRC panels. And yes, ma'am, that's the idea behind using that
Okay,
material.
that's fantastic because see, whenever the client sees such kind of forms, he feels that, array, how I am going to construct it.
Yes,
Architectural ideas and concepts are very beautiful, but then implementation is also a very important parameter on that.
exactly.
See,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, and you have designed this music center, right? So,
Yes, ma'am.
anything related with the music that you feel has been an inspiration to this form, or the architectural
Uh,
style that you have adopted in this project particularly?
yeah, ma'am, I actually think that. So, like Anuj introduced saying that I like all genre of music. It's actually true. And I thought that whenever I see a wavelength of each genre, if you see a rock music wavelength, it's all SR going up and down. And if you see more of a soft music, their wavelengths are going very softly. So I think what in my head it was going on, if what if I combine all of this and just create a lot of play with levels and horizontally just like playing with the wavelengths of the structure. So like that, I think it kind of influenced me.
Yes, so that is why I think the structure looks truly wonderful in its concept
Thank
and
you.
its design parameter. So thank you, Noel,
Thank
for
you.
a wonderful and really appreciate at your level of architecture. Like I think you are
Thank
a
you,
third
ma'am.
year project, right?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
this is a fourth,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. So this is a really wonderful thing that you have done, and
Thank
really
you, ma'am.
appreciate your inputs and ideas. So
Thank you,
thank you
ma'am.
for being a part of
Thank you.
Pravara Rural College of
Yes,
Architecture
ma'am. Thank you
in
so much for
month
having
and
me, ma'am.
discussion session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Anuj.
Thank you.
So, at the end of this session, I would like to thank our two wonderful speakers and talented fellow speakers for today's Manthan session, Mr. Noel Prabhakar and Mr. Rohit Kataria, who shared some interesting information and their interesting topics for their presentation with all of us. I would also thank our principal ma'am for starting up with this Manthan session, and I also thank her for technically hosting this event. And last but not the least, I thank you all for joining this wonderful and lovely session of Manthan with us. Hope you keep joining with us further as well. Thank you.